Hey guys, so I want to record one last, or show you an exemplar oral commentary that I'm doing for 3 reasons. The first is that while I thought the video I asked you to view showed a lot of great things, he was talking about a novel that you guys have not read, The Catcher in the Rye, which might have been a little confusing for you. Second, uh, obviously I want you to hear one with Frankenstein. But I also am going to pull different things than he pulled. So he talked a lot about setting in his. He talked a lot about characterization. I'm going to pull some other things to show you an example of all the various things about literature you can talk about to demonstrate a clear understanding of the text. And finally, you guys are not juniors or seniors. You're not doing your full oral commentary yet. I want you to see really what I'm looking for when I'm going to be watching your videos this weekend. Yay. So I'm going to get started. I'm going to read my passage to you because it is not a passage you have seen before. For those of you that read the book, you've seen it, but I know most of you didn't. So I'm going to read my passage to you. In your oral commentary, do not read the passage to me. All of you are doing the same passage. That does not count towards your 4 to 5 minutes. I do not need to be read to, but thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to read it. I arrived at Geneva. My father in earnest yet lived, with the former sunk under the tidings that I bore. I see him now, excellent and venerable old man. His eyes wandered in vacancy, for they had lost their charm and their delight. His Elizabeth, his more than daughter, whom he doted on with all that affection which a man feels, who in the decline of his life, having few affections, clings more earnestly to those that remain. Cursed be the fiend that brought misery on his gray hairs, and doomed him to waste in wretchedness. He could not live under the horrors that were accumulated around him. The springs of existence suddenly gave way. He was unable to rise from his bed, and in a few days he died in my arms. What then became of me, I know not. I lost sensation, and chains and darkness were the only objects that pressed upon me. Sometimes, indeed, I dreamed that I wandered in flowery meadows and pleasant vales with the friends of my youth, but I awoke and found myself in a dungeon. Melancholy followed, but by degrees I gained a clear conception of my miseries and situation, and was then released from my prison. For they had called me mad, and during many months, as I understood, a solitary cell had been my habitation. Liberty, however, had been an useless gift to me, had I not, as I awakened to reason, at the same time awakened to revenge. As the memory of past misfortunes pressed upon me, I began to reflect on their cause, the monster whom I had created, the miserable demon whom I had sent abroad into the world for my destruction. So this passage is following Elizabeth's death. The creature asked Frankenstein to create a monster for him, which he, of course, refused and destroyed. And in order to get revenge, the night of Frankenstein's marriage to Elizabeth, the creature broke in and murdered her. At this point in the text, Frankenstein has returned home, and he is with his father, who dies, and he kind of is explaining the thought process he goes to following that, and how he works himself up to revenge. What this passage actually demonstrates is the Frankenstein's mental instability and the fact that that is where his own monstrosity, the true monstrosity in the novel, lies. He exhibits all these things that are not human, or I guess he lacks things that lend themselves to humanity. So the first place you can see this is when he talks about his own mental status, and for the reader, his mental instability. He says, I know not, I lost sensation, and chains and darkness were the only objects that pressed upon me. Upon first reading that, it really seems like the chains and darkness are symbols or imagery to express his mental instability, that he felt, chained down by his sadness and by the loss of his family, and that, like, the darkness was representative of the melancholy and the absolute dissolution that he feels after he loses his father, who is really his last tie to humanity after Justine dies and William dies and Henry dies and Elizabeth dies. But the actuality is that it's not symbolic. He states it as symbolic, which makes you think he doesn't even realize that it's not. It's not imagery. It actually is his reality, because it says, was then released from my prison. I understood a solitary cell had been my habitation. So he wasn't he wasn't like figuratively in chains or figuratively in darkness. He was actually in chains and actually in darkness, because they had committed him because of his mental instability and his craziness. But the very fact that he states it as such, and like he spends all this time talking about the symbolism of his mental status, for him it creates a distance between what he was feeling or it creates a distance between the fact that other people thought he was crazy, and it's just like mentioned briefly, he just like slips it in there, to show that he doesn't really fully comprehend his own, the way people viewed him as somehow broken and somehow deranged. The fact that he doesn't even fully reflect on where he was and why he was there shows you that he is this true monster, because it's exhibited in other parts of the novel, as he refuses to identify his own role in his own destruction. You can also see this where he says, the monster whom I, at the very bottom, he says, the monster whom I had created, the miserable demon who I had sent abroad into the world for my destruction. So here it almost seems, with his use of the word I, that he is taking ownership over the fact that he created the monster, but he's identifying the monster's, I guess, the creature's monstrosity, the creature's lack of humanity with the moment the creature was created. Which in its essence puts blame on the creature. So for him, it doesn't matter what I did after that. When I created the monster, he was created, he was a monster, and he was coming for my destruction. In reality, you see throughout the novel that the creature does exhibit signs of humanity when he begins to question himself and think about his place in the world, and develops an affection for the cottagers, and kind of wants a female, wants a mate, wants what love, which many people would argue makes you really human. He doesn't equate the creature's monstrosity with his own actions, which were refusing to create the female, kind of refusing to help him, refusing to have a relationship with him. Those things that, abandoning him in the first place, those things that like really took the creature from just like us to the monster. And I believe that this passage demonstrates that Frankenstein is the true monster, because he never recognizes that. He is actually incapable of feeling that type of empathy and exhibiting that kind of self-reflection that would get him to that place. Yeah.